Good evening and welcome everyone to the Planning Committee Small Applications. I'm Councillor Richard Taylor, Chair of this committee, and we'll start with introductions. So Dennis, if you'd like, and we'll go around.
Good evening, my name is Dennis Ongweme. I'm the lead planning officer for this meeting, representing the Director of Planning and Growth to assist members on matters of planning policy, the General Administrator of the meeting. Thank you.
My name is Councillor Jane Salmon. I'm a Surrey Docks councillor.
I'm Councillor Kath Whitton, Rotherhithe councillor and vice chair of this committee. Oh, that's Jean. Sorry, I could correct that. I'm vice chair of another committee. But I still am a ward councillor for Rotherhithe.
Councillor Andy Higson, St Giles. Councillor Sean Hannigan, Dulwich Wood.
Councillor James Moyes, Camberwell Green, Vice Chair of No Committee.
Councillor Morgan Ewins, Dulwich Village Ward, member of the Planning Committee.
Sean Gomez, a Senior Planning Officer in the Major Applications and New Homes team.
Hello, I'm Gerald Gawler, I'm the Committee Clerk.
Michael Feeney, Legal Advisor.
Great, thanks everyone. Before we start the meeting, we have a few housekeeping announcements to make. There are no planned fire alarm tests today. If you hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is St John's Churchyard off Druid Street. Council security staff will be available to direct you. The public toilet is located off the main reception area. There is a refreshment machine for use by members of the public in the waiting area outside this meeting room. Finally, please switch your mobile phone to silent whilst in the meeting room. This meeting has been live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel, so if you address the committee, please do not disclose any information you do not wish to be in the public domain. Members of the public are welcome to film, audio record, photograph, or post any social media of the public proceedings of the meeting. I'd ask you to please be considerate towards other people in the room and take care not to disturb the proceedings. If you are filming the meeting, please do not film the audience. You are welcome to use our free guest Wi-Fi at Southwark. No login is required. During the meeting, members of the committee will not access the internet except as it relates to the official business of the meeting. Send or receive emails, texts, messages, or posts on social media concerning the business of the committee. I would also like to remind speakers to use their microphone when speaking, as only the audio from the microphones is captured on the live stream, and not to place their mobile devices next to the microphones to avoid interference. Have we received any apologies? I think we have our full committee here, so that's all good. Please will the voting members of the committee indicate by raising their hands. Alright, that's great, thanks. The addendum report and members pack have been circulated. Does any member wish to declare any interest or dispensation in respect of any item or issue to be considered at this meeting? No? Okay, great, thank you. Can we agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of July 2026 as an accurate record of proceedings, pages 1 to 4? Go.
No, Chair, they're not an accurate record of the proceedings.
Would you like to, or which bits do you not feel like?
So there were two applications considered. The first of which was the Coomber Grove site, and the second of which was Allain School, Townley Road. And the conditions which I asked to be applied to the first application are shown in the minutes as being applied to the second application. Although they are not really what I fully asked for either, but unequivocally they have nothing whatsoever to do with the second application and everything to do with the first application. Do you want to,
Yes, we need a point of correction for those minutes to be corrected. Is that something that
Yeah, so the minutes can be corrected and brought back to a future meeting, if that's
Okay.
okay.
I mean, I could go into more detail as to why. So it's so categorically. I apologise. I couldn't find the right glasses coming out, so I can't really see properly. But categorically, the items listed as resolved under item 6.2 could not conceivably refer to a marquee. And they do refer to the Coombe Grove, but equally. I mean, how is best? So for example, the reason I raised those amendments, or the reason I asked for those conditions, were specifically to safeguard the urban greening factor in perpetuity, and they do not refer to the urban greening factor at all. I don't know whether that was a misunderstanding. There is a reference there to SUDS. There is a reference there to in accordance with the sort of planting in accordance with the relevant British standards. I don't know what the relevant British standards are, and they're certainly not anything which I referred to when I asked for those conditions. So I don't know. Is that something that I should? I mean, it's probably easiest to refer back to the transcripts of the meeting. But I mean, equally, I'd be very happy to take. To write something which I think should have been said. I mean, it will be in the recordings of the meeting, but basically, that's the case.
I think for today, the committee just needs to resolve to correct the minutes of the meeting and bring it back for the next committee meeting, and then how that's done in the meantime, officers might ask you, Councillor Newens, if they need any help, or they can just refer to the transcripts. What you've said has been noted today.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll bring the minutes back to the next meeting.
Yeah.
As follows. So on to the next item, which is the item 6. The purpose of this meeting is to review the planning application and to vote on what the committee's official position would have been had the committee decided the application. The committee's decision this evening then determines the council's position in relation to the appeal against non-determination. If the committee decides that they would have refused the application, they must clearly state valid, evidence-based planning reasons for refusal. I would like to remind everyone of the committee guidance on the conduct of business. So officers will present the report, outline their recommendations and answer questions raised by the committee. If present and wishing to speak, the following may then address the committee for no more than 3 minutes. So, as one spokesperson representing any objectors to the application. By now, they would need to have identified a single spokesperson. If more than one objector wishes to speak, the time will be divided up. The applicant or their agent. One spokesperson representing any supporters of the application who live within 100 metres of the development site. A ward councillor representing the area affected by the proposal. Each speaker should restrict their comments to the planning aspects of the proposal and should avoid repeating information which is already in the report. At the end of each representation, the committee may ask questions of the presenter. After receiving all submissions, the committee will debate the application and consider the recommendation. This is a council committee meeting which is open to the public, and there should be no interruptions from the audience. The chair has the authority to maintain order. Attendees whose behaviour prevents the meeting from proceeding smoothly will be asked to leave the meeting. Finally, I would like everyone present to know that although this planning committee comprises of members from different political parties, we are not politically whipped. Our decisions are made in accordance with the council's planning policy and other material considerations based on the information contained within the relevant reports, together with consultation responses and any verbal submissions made today. So I'll move on to the next item, which is the item 6.1. Councillor Whitton?
I'm not sure, you said two different things there. We're deciding the application as normal, or are we looking?
Shall I just
Yes,
explain?
please.
So the council hasn't made a decision on the application, and the applicant has appealed against non-determination. The appeal is listed to be heard on the 25th of August. What we're doing today is you, the committee, are deciding what decision you would have made on the application if you'd made the decision, and that then determines what the council's position in relation to the appeal is. So you're not making the final decision today. The planning inspector will make the final decision, but you approach it like any other application, and that whether, if you say we would have granted permission, then that means at the appeal the council will say we think permission should be granted. If you say the application should be refused, then at the appeal the council's position would be permission should be refused. And then ultimately the inspector makes the final decision.
Does that clarify?
Were objectors invited to the meeting?
Yes, yes, Chair, they're invited to the meeting using the usual procedure. They're called before committee letters sent to any contributor who are written to the council on the application.
And the applicant has just sent one person?
Yes, yes, Chair.
Right, so we'll move on to item 6.1 of the agenda, which is application 24 AP 3834, non-determination appeal, address 269 275 Rye Lane and 1A Philip Walk, London, SE15, pages 10 to 75 of the agenda pack and amendment report. So I should pass over to Sean for the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Those of you with a keen eye will note that it's not the 30th of June on the slide. It is, in fact, the 10th of August. That's an oversight on my part. Apologies. We have not time travelled. Okay. So, yes, this is a non-determination appeal for the demolition of an existing building and construction of mixed-use development comprising 38 residential flats and commercial floor space, together with landscaping, plant, car parking, cycle storage, waste and recycling storage and associated works. The recommendation, it is recommended that the Planning Committee, number 1, note that an appeal for non-determination has been received in respect of planning application reference 24AP 3834 and that the major application would normally have been considered and determined by the Planning Committee but will now be determined by the Secretary of State. Number 2, the Planning Committee should note that a planning inspector has been appointed to decide the appeal and that an appeal hearing has been listed with a time estimate of 1 day commencing on the 25th of August. And number 3, it is recommended that the Planning Committee consider and endorse the officer recommendation that would have been to grant permission subject to planning conditions and completion of a legal agreement had the application not been appealed for non-determination. There's some bullet points here for the reason for delay in determination. This was to do with the affordable housing payment in lieu negotiations, design revisions to Block A, that's the block fronting Rye Lane, revisions to cycle parking, amenity space, play space, flat layouts and general plans. Additional supporting documents were updated, including air quality, energy and sustainability, ecology, flooding and drainage. The amendments are set out in full in the appellant's statement of case. The latest agreed time extension to the determination of the application expired on the 31st of March 2026, and a further reason for delays was the local election and associated PERDA period. Moving on to the site description and location, the application site is a 0.15 hectare plot, or approximately 0.15 hectare plot on the eastern side of Rye Lane, containing a vacant end of terrace building. It is considered a brownfield site / previously developed land due to the historic buildings on site, and there is a colour code below. So to the north is a building known as Cooperative House, that's number 259 Rye Lane. To the east is the industrial units on Philip Walk. To the south of the site there are the properties along Philip Walk and the rear elevations of 277 to 285 Rye Lane. And the little pink box is to the west is the Rye Lane frontage, that's Rye Lane itself. The site is not within a conservation area but adjoins Rye Lane Peckham Conservation Area to the north. Due to its location, the site forms part of the conservation area's setting. A terrace of locally listed buildings is located opposite the site. Rye Lane is the principal commercial corridor and town centre frontage within Peckham. The site occupies a transitional location between the larger commercial character of Rye Lane to the north and the smaller residential areas to the south. The site is subject to the following planning designations. It's within the Peckham area vision boundary, it's within Peckham major town centre area, it's within Peckham and Nunhead action area, it's within Peckham area action core, it's within an air quality management area, it's within a critical drainage area known as East Southwark, it's within a hot food takeaway primary school exclusion zone, and part of the site forms protected shopping frontage. This is an aerial view of the site, so as you can see to the west where my cursor is now, hopefully you can see my cursor, but to where my cursor is moving, that is Rye Lane there. To the north is the previously mentioned Cooperative House. To the east is the industrial units on Philip Walk, and to the south is the properties on Rye Lane, the terrace running Rye Lane, down Rye Lane, which is mixed commercial and residential, and the residential properties on Philip Walk. Here are some existing site photographs. So this is the view of the site from Rye Lane. These are some photos taken within the site. Further photos taken within the site and from the entrance to the private road on Philip Walk. Moving on to the details of the proposal, it's for the provision of a mixed-use development comprising 38 residential units, split between Block A, fronting Rye Lane at 5 stories, and Block B to the rear of the site at 6 stories. There is also approximately 152 square metres of commercial floor space. Other works include landscaping, plant equipment, cycle parking, waste and refuse storage, and other enabling works. At ground floor, the commercial unit fronts Rye Lane, and there is residential gates alongside. There is a secondary residential gate on Philip Walk. Other ground floor provisions include one disabled blue badge parking bay, amenity space including play space, plant rooms, ancillary services which include waste, refuse and cycle storage. In terms of public consultation responses, the application was advertised by neighbour letters sent within 100 metre radius of the site, press notice and site notices. In total, 19 letters of representation have been received, with 18 letters of objection and 1 letter of support. The main issues raised by public consultation responses were the principle of development and land use, absence of affordable housing, design, scale and appearance, neighbouring amenity impacts, transport and highways impacts, and other matters were raised, however they were non-material to planning. Those include party wall matters and impact on local house prices. Moving on to the plans and elevations. This is the proposed ground floor plan. So the part in orange to the front of the site is the commercial unit, and that forms the wider Block A. There are 2 units on ground floor of Block A, and the part in grey in the middle is the ancillary services. So that's your bike storage, some plant equipment, waste and refuse storage, etc., and the circulation space and lift. The block to the east, Block B, has 2 ground floor residential units, and again similarly it's ancillary functions with the circulation space, waste and refuse, bike storage, disabled parking bay and a plant room. At first floor level there are 4 units in Block A towards the front of the site, and there are 4 units at Block B. Similarly, the layout is virtually matched on the floor above at second floor, so there are 4 units in Block A and there are 4 units in Block B. At third floor level there are 4 units in Block A and there are 4 units in Block B. At fourth floor level there are 3 units in Block A and there are 4 units in Block B. And at fifth floor level there are 3 units in Block B. Moving on to the elevations now. So if we start at the bottom, elevation A is the view from Rye Lane, so that's Block A, that's what you'll see. So it's a continuation of the Rye Lane terrace and then stepped massing up to form a 5-storey building. And then elevation B is the front elevation of the block to the back, Block B. Moving on to additional elevations. So if we start at the bottom again, that is the view from Cooperative House of block, that's both blocks there. So Cooperative House, my apologies, this is the view the other way around. So this is the view from Philip Walk, looking towards the site to the north. There's block B to the right and block A to the left. And this view on the top, elevation C, is the rear-facing view of block A. That's the Rye Lane block. Elevation E, this top one, is the view from the industrial units on Philip Walk. So that's predominantly a blank brick facade. And the elevation at the bottom is the view from Cooperative House, with the sort of grey area as the indicative outline of that building. There are some visuals here. So this is the Rye Lane frontage, an indicative render of the scheme. This is an additional view, sort of looking north to south along Rye Lane. There's a further setback view moving towards Rye Lane Common, and that's the view sort of south to north up Rye Lane. This would be the view of the proposed development from Philip Walk Properties. This is block B to the back, and in the sort of left corner there you can see some of block A as well. Moving on to the key issues for consideration. So it's the principle of the development in land use terms, it's tenure mix, affordable housing, so that's social rented and intermediate housing, and viability. It's the dwelling mix, including wheelchair housing. It's the internal residential accommodation standards, external amenity space and play space, design, layout and heritage, neighbouring amenity, landscaping, trees and urban greening, biodiversity net gain, ecology and biodiversity, transport and highways, energy and sustainability, air quality, fire safety, ground conditions and contamination, water resources and flood risk, archaeology, socio-economic impacts, construction management and other matters, and again CIL as well, community infrastructure levy. Moving on to the principle of the proposed development in land use terms, the site was previously used for industrial and commercial purposes. Following a planning permission which was granted in 2018, that's reference 16 AP 1896, the uses ceased and the buildings became vacant. The buildings were demolished in August 2021 under the extant planning permission, and the site has remained vacant since. The previous planning permission was lawfully implemented and remains a material planning consideration. The principle of a mixed-use development comprising residential and commercial uses has therefore already been established on site. As I mentioned earlier, the site is located within Peckham Area Vision Boundary, Peckham Major Town Centre, the Peckham and Unhead Action Core, the Peckham Action Area Core, and in summary, these designations, amongst other things, identify the area as suitable for housing growth with increased densities, employment generating uses, and significant future development and change. Southwark currently has a 4.53-year housing land supply, which is below the required 5-year housing land supply. As a result, the NPPF presumption in favour of sustainable development is engaged. This is sometimes known as the tilted balance. The proposal would provide 38 new homes in a highly sustainable town centre location. The scheme would contribute towards addressing the borough's housing shortfall, and significant weight is attached to the delivery of additional housing, particularly in the context of the Council's current inability to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. The principle of development is considered acceptable in land use terms. The proposal would deliver 38 new homes, retain a commercial use within the Peckham Major Town Centre area. It would redevelop a vacant brownfield site and support land use policy objectives in a highly sustainable location. Significant positive weight is attributed to the housing and brownfield redevelopment benefits. Moving on to tenure mix, affordable housing, social rented, intermediate housing and viability. Policy P1 of the Southwark Plan requires developments of 10 or more homes to provide the maximum amount of affordable housing with a minimum target of 35%, subject to viability. Southwark has a significant affordable housing need with over 18,000 households on the housing waiting list. It has an identified annual need for 2,077 affordable homes. Approximately 93% of households have incomes that indicate a need for social and intermediate housing. The proposal provides no on-site affordable housing, no off-site affordable housing, and no financial contribution in lieu. The applicant has explored delivery options with registered providers. Only one registered provider showed interest. However, the tenure did not accord with Southwark's adopted planning policy, and the registered provider was not on Southwark's preferred RP list. Limited registered provider interest was demonstrated with concerns relating to the scheme scale, so that's the number of units provided, Section 106 acquisition strategies, and some registered providers, it was outside their area of operation. The applicant submitted a financial viability assessment that concluded the scheme was in a 6.17 million deficit. The council commissioned an independent review which identified the scheme to be more viable than originally assessed, but still in a 1.85 million deficit. The council's independent assessor concluded that a nil affordable housing contribution represents the maximum viable provision. A late-stage viability review is proposed to capture any future uplift in viability arising from increased sales values and reduced construction costs. Any additional viability would be directed towards an affordable housing contribution. The proposal does not deliver 35% affordable housing due to the demonstrated viability constraints. The council accepts that the scheme has been tested to a maximum viable level, resulting in a nil contribution. The borough's housing land supply shortfall is a material consideration, and weight should be given to the delivery of new homes. The applicant previously offered a £1 million payment in lieu, despite viability assessments showing a deficit. This offer is contested but remains in blue pencil in the draft Section 106 agreement. It will be for the planning inspector to determine whether the blue pencil offer meets the relevant statutory tests set out in the CIL regulations, CIL Regulation 122 of the CIL Regs 2010, and a planning obligation may only constitute a reason for granting permission for the development if the obligation is A, necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, B, directly related to the development, and C, fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind to the development. Moving on to the dwelling mix, the scheme delivers 63.15 family size rooms, that's units with 2 bedrooms or more. A minor shortfall is identified for 3 bedroom homes, 3+ bedroom homes, with the scheme providing 18.4% compared to the 20% target. 2 bedroom homes comprise a mix of 3 and 4 person units, and the total M43 rooms being delivered is 17, which exceeds the 12.6% habitable room policy target. The overall dwelling mix, including wheelchair accessible dwelling mix, is considered in general compliance with adopted policy requirements. There's a detailed breakdown there below. In terms of internal residential accommodation, all non-wheelchair accessible dwellings comply with the nationally described space standards, London Plan standards and Southwark Plan standards. All single and double bedrooms meet the relevant minimum bedroom size standards. 9 units have a marginal shortfall in kitchen, living, diner space, and that standard is set out in the locally adopted Household Development SPD 2025. These shortfalls range from 0.12 square metres to 1.75 square metres. All residential units achieve a floor-to-ceiling height of at least 2.5 metres across more than 75% of the internal area, with floor-to-ceiling heights of 2.65 achieved in Block B. 11 units, which equates to 28.9% of the development, are single aspect. 25 units are dual aspect, that's 65.8%, and 2 units are triple aspect, that's 5.3%. There are no north-facing single aspect units, and there are no south-facing single aspect units. Several units feature obscure glazing on their respective second and third aspects. Some bedrooms will rely solely on obscure glazed windows. There is a detailed breakdown in that table to the top right. The applicant has provided an internal lighting assessment to support their application. In Block A, 78% of the rooms satisfy the criteria. In Block B, apologies, if I backtrack for one moment. So the first table is for internal daylighting and the second table is for internal sunlighting. So in Block A, 78% of the rooms satisfy the criteria. In Block B, 94% of the rooms satisfy the criteria, with an overall criteria met at 88%. Moving on to internal sunlight, it's approximately, well, in Block A it's 70%, in Block B it's just over 70%, and the overall average is rounded to 70.1%. The scheme provides 5 wheelchair accessible / adaptable M43 homes, exceeding the overall habitable room policy requirement for housing, wheelchair housing provision. All wheelchair units fall below the minimum floor space standards, with shortfalls ranging from 2.7 square metres to 5.6 square metres. All wheelchair units are located above the ground floor, and there is no second lift provided to the wheelchair accommodation. Some wheelchair units have rooms that do not meet internal lighting guidance. Notwithstanding the accommodation issues identified, the quality of accommodation across the site is considered in general compliance with the development plan, in light of the Council's housing land supply shortfall and with the potential for a payment in lieu towards affordable housing. Moving on to external amenity space and children's play space, so just outlining the policy requirements there. So flatted developments should provide 10 square metres of amenity space, or private amenity space, per unit, with any shortfall added to the communal amenity space requirements. Flatted developments should also provide 50 square metres of communal amenity space per block. Children's play space requirements are calculated in line with the GLA calculator. So looking at the site itself, so Block A has a private amenity space, that's balconies, balcony space, shortfall of 50 square metres. Block B has a shortfall of 32 square metres. The overall amenity space shortfall across the site is calculated at 82.3 square metres. The on-site provision is 59 square metres, and there is additionally 77 square metres of children's play space provided on site. It is worth noting that all units have private amenity space, with some below 10 square metres. Overall, the proposed development is acceptable in terms of amenity and play space provision, subject to planning conditions for detailed landscaping design and a planning obligation to charge for the shortfall in amenity space, and that will be used to improve local publicly accessible open space. There's a plan of the play space and the communal amenity space. So the play space is in blue and the communal amenity space is in pink. Moving on to design, layout and heritage, there is no objection to the demolition of the fire damaged building at 27 Rye Lane, which is not a listed heritage asset. The scheme has undergone extensive design review and amendments following officer feedback. Block A, we'll remind ourselves, is the block fronting Rye Lane, that's 5 stories with a setback upper floor. Block B steps from 6 to 4 stories, that's the block to the rear. Height, scale and massing are designed to provide an appropriate transition between the commercial centre to the north and the surrounding residential context to the south. The scheme preserves the setting and significance of the adjacent Rye Lane conservation area. Proposed materials and architectural detailing are considered high quality and reflective of local character. Additionally, conditions will be used to secure final details of materials and detailed design. Overall, the proposal is considered acceptable in design, townscape and heritage terms. Moving on to neighbouring amenity, so in terms of privacy and overlooking, there are potential overlooking impacts for Cooperative House, that's the residential development to the north, Philip Walk properties to the south, and 277 Rye Lane, which is the nearest property on the Rye Lane terrace to the site. However, these can appropriately be mitigated through obscure glazing and obscure balustrades. Planning conditions will secure these measures before above-grade works commence. Subject to mitigation, no unacceptable privacy impacts are anticipated. In terms of daylight assessment, 345 neighbouring windows were assessed for vertical sky component. Of those 345, 326 were compliant, so that's 95%. In terms of daylight distribution, 240 neighbouring rooms are assessed. Of those 240 rooms, 222 rooms were compliant, which is 93%. There were some adverse impacts identified, primarily affecting a limited number of rooms/windows at Cooperative House and a small number of rooms at 277 Rye Lane. The impacts are considered generally localised and acceptable within an urban context. In terms of sunlight, 190 rooms were assessed for sunlight impact. Of those 190 rooms, 179 were compliant, that's 94% compliance. At Cooperative House, are already constrained by overhanging balconies and orientation. It's not considered that there will be any material adverse sunlight impacts to identified neighbouring properties or residential accommodation. Moving on to the overshadowing of amenity space, so there were 11 communal amenity areas assessed. On the 21st of March, 7 areas comply in full with the BRE guidance. 4 areas experience reductions beyond the guidance, however 2 are only marginally affected. Moving on to the 21st of June, all 11 areas comply with the BRE guidance. Again, there is no material adverse impact on amenity spaces during peak summer use. In terms of outlook and sense of enclosure, the development will reduce openness and outlook to some neighbouring properties. The impact reflects development of a currently vacant site within an urban setting. Scale, massing and form are considered compatible with the surrounding built form, particularly Cooperative House, and the overall impact on outlook is considered acceptable. In terms of noise and odour, the use of the residential dwellings is not expected to generate noise beyond typical enjoyment of dwellings. There are additional conditions recommended to control plant noise and commercial operating hours, and that will be from 7 in the morning to 11 at night. The Environmental Protection Team were consulted and raised no objections subject to conditions, and there is no odour generating plant equipment proposed. Overall, the proposal has been assessed in relation to privacy, daylight, sunlight, overshadowing, outlook, noise and odour impacts on surrounding properties, and overall officers consider that the development would not result in unacceptable harm to neighbouring amenity subject to planning conditions. Moving on to landscaping, trees and urban greening, the development is required to achieve a UGF score or ratio of 0.4 and is proposed to achieve 0.41, exceeding the policy requirement. UGF is delivered through a combination of tree planting, green roofs, perennial planting, hedges and grassland and permeable paving. The Council's urban forester raises no objection to proposed landscaping, tree planting and urban greening, and there are no tree or landscaping constraints affecting the site. Planning conditions are recommended to secure detailed landscaping, green/blue roof designs, and they will also ensure that the urban greening factor is delivered. Moving on to the statutory biodiversity net gain, the development is required to deliver a biodiversity net gain of 10%. So the applicant submitted BNG assessment demonstrates that can be achieved on site. So the baseline habitat units were 0.31 habitat units. The predicted post-development habitat units are 0.48, so that's a 55% uplift. The predicted uplift of 55% significantly exceeds the statutory 10% requirement, and under BNG legislation and guidance, the gains are considered significant, and therefore conditions are recommended, and that's a biodiversity gain plan, so that's a statutory condition, and an additional condition for a habitat maintenance and monitoring plan, which will ensure the habitat is maintained for a period of 30 years. Additional ecology and biodiversity, so the ecological was reviewed by the ecology team and accepted in principle. There were 2 bat emergent surveys undertaken with no evidence of bats recording on site or in the surrounding area. There are additional biodiversity enhancements beyond biodiversity net gain, which is a provision of SWIP bricks and bat boxes. Invasive species were identified on site and will be removed by the developer in accordance with best practice. As mentioned previously, the site is in an excellent public transport accessibility zone, so that's PTAL 6, that's the highest, second highest rating on that scoring system, with bus stops and rail services nearby. No objections were raised by Southwark Transport Policy Team, the Highways Team and Transport for London. The development is to be car-free, and residents would be restricted from obtaining on-street parking permits within the controlled parking zone. There is one blue badge parking bay on site. Sorry, just going back to the restriction of parking permits. Parking permits are restricted for everyone save for disabled persons, so people with disabilities would still be allowed to apply for permits. And there is additionally one blue badge bay on site. There are 74 long stay cycle parking spaces and 2 short stay spaces, these provided in a secure, accessible and policy compliant form. Along Rye Lane, there has been a recent Healthy Streets Rye Lane improvements work that went through Cabinet last year, which is to support walking, cycling and public transport use, and a £53,200 contribution is requested from the developer towards contributing to those works. In terms of servicing the development and trip generation, there are conditions recommended for servicing management plans, so there is one for the commercial unit and one for the residential units. Existing and enhanced loading facilities will be delivered by Section 278 agreement. There will be an increase in trips to the site, a material increase in trips to the site by walking, cycling, bus and rail, but no significant highways impacts due to the development being predominantly car-free. Additionally, a Section 278 agreement for temporary and permanent highway works is part of the planning legal agreement. In terms of energy and sustainability, so the development achieves a 79.8% reduction in regulated carbon emissions compared to the baseline. So going through the hierarchy, in terms of B-Lean, its energy efficient design measures deliver an 18% carbon reduction. The B-Clean, there is an obligation in the planning legal agreement to future-proof the building for the potential connection to a district heat network. And in terms of B Green, there's air source heat pumps and roof-mounted solar panels, and they deliver a 63% carbon reduction. To account for the 79.8% versus the 100% policy requirement, a carbon offset contribution is sought, and that's £16,530. The policy team in the planning department have reviewed the proposals and raised no objections. So in summary, the development is considered compliant with energy and sustainability policies. So just go over the obligation I haven't mentioned, so that's ongoing energy monitoring, so that's the BC number 3 at the bottom. In terms of air quality, the air quality assessment was submitted and reviewed by the Council's Environmental Protection Team. It's considered that the development is air quality neutral, meeting both building and transport emissions benchmarks, and no additional air quality mitigation measures are required. In terms of fire safety, the development is a major development and is therefore required to submit a fire statement. The fire statement has been submitted and is considered to address the relevant policy requirements. Detailed fire safety compliance will be secured through the building regulations process. In terms of ground conditions and contamination, piling works are proposed and a piling method statement will be secured by condition to protect underground utilities. Given the site's former industrial / commercial uses, a contaminated land assessment and remediation strategy is secured by condition. Moving on to water resource and flood risks. So there is a recommended planning condition to secure a water consumption rate in the design and construction of the development to 105 litres per day. The site is located within flood zone 1, which is the lowest flood risk area. The surface water drainage proposed has been reviewed by the lead local flood authority and considered acceptable. The development is able to achieve greenfield runoff rates and will not increase flood risk on or off site. Overall, the proposal complies with water resource and flood risk policies, subject to conditions. In terms of archaeology, there is no material impact anticipated as the site is not within an archaeological priority area. Moving on to socio-economic impacts, the development will deliver benefits, and that's by the form of the commercial unit, which will contribute to the local economy, and there is an additional obligation for the local procurement of goods and services during after construction, that's 10%. Construction management, that will be controlled by construction logistic plans, so that manages the highway movements to and from the site and any measures that need to be undertaken to enable the works, and a construction environmental management plan which will manage the environmental impacts of the development. There is an obligation placed upon the developer to secure active monitoring of the highways, so that's the construction logistics plan and the environmental management plan, so that the environmental protection team can monitor that. In terms of other matters, high-speed internet ducting provision will be secured via condition, and the approximate civil contribution would be 1.3 million. Moving on to the recommended planning conditions now. The approved plans condition is standard, the time limit condition, the 2 biodiversity net gain conditions, the land contamination, the 2 construction management conditions, so that's the construction logistics plan and construction environmental management plan, the piling method statement to protect underground assets, the design conditions, so that's detailed design drawings and external material samples. There's a landscaping and place-based details condition. There is a green roof condition. There are bird and bat box details conditions. There are external lighting details conditions. There is an obscure glazing detail condition. There is a secured by design detail condition. There is waste and refuse storage conditions. There are cycle storage provision conditions. There are conditions relating to the provision of accessible housing. As I mentioned previously, there's servicing management plan for the residential units and then an additional one for the commercial unit. The commercial unit will also have a use restriction to restrict some of the E-class uses to ensure that the frontage remains active. The commercial unit will also have an hours of use condition to protect neighbouring amenity, that's 7 AM to 11 PM. There is a water condition to restrict water flow rates to the optional requirement in building regulations, that's 105 litres per day per person. There is a plant noise condition. There is a surface water drainage conditions to ensure that the sustainable urban drainage system drains at greenfield runoff rates, and there is a full fibre connectivity ducting condition. Moving on to the planning obligations, there is a planning obligation for affordable housing, social rented and intermediate homes. So there is a standard mechanism in there, and then there is also the aforementioned blue pencil clause relating to the contested £1 million payment in Nilu. There is a planning obligation for local procurement of goods and services during and after construction. There is the energy and sustainability obligations that I mentioned previously. There's a biodiversity net gain monitoring fee that will be used to monitor the habitat enhancements over a period of 30 years. There are the 2 construction management, so the construction logistics, that will allow the highways team to actively monitor the impacts of the development whilst it's in construction, and there is a construction environmental management plan obligation fee which will allow the environmental protection team to monitor the development and its impacts on the local environment and local amenity. There is the Healthy Streets Rye Lane improvement works contribution. There is a contribution for amenity space shortfall. There is a contribution for Section 278 works, so those are highway works to enable the development, so it widens the loading bay out front of the site, and for temporary works as well to allow for servicing. There is a obligation to keep the development car free, so that's the restriction of the parking permit, say for disabled persons. There is an additional obligation on the disabled units and disabled parking bay to be retained. There's administration and compliance fees and technical and non-technical submission fees. Moving on to the planning conclusion, the proposed development is in general compliance with the development plan when viewed as a whole. Accordingly, it is recommended members endorse the officer recommendation that would have been to grant planning permission subject to planning conditions and completion of a legal agreement had the application not been appealed for non-determination. Looking at the wording from the tilted balance, so officers have not identified a strong reason for refusal when viewed against policies that protect areas or assets of particular importance, nor have officers identified any adverse impacts that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the NPPF taken as a whole, having had particular regard to the key policies to directing development to sustainable locations, making effective use of land, securing well-designed places, and providing affordable homes, individually or combination, including the specific paragraphs within the footnote. Substantial weight has been attributed to the value of using brownfield land for homes and other identified needs, including the opportunity to remediate any potentially contaminated land in reaching the planning recommendation. I'll reread the recommendation. So it is recommended that the Planning Committee note that the appeal for non-determination has been made, and it will be determined by the Secretary of State. Number 2, note that a planning inspector has been appointed on behalf of the Secretary of State to decide the appeal, and that a hearing has been listed with a time estimate of 1 day on the 25th of August. And 3, consider and endorse the officer recommendation that would have been to grant planning permission subject to conditions and completion of a legal agreement had the application not been appealed for non-determination.
Thank you, Sean. Do any members have any points of clarification for Sean? Councillor Hannigan?
Cheers, thank you. I just want to ask, there's only one wheelchair space, but there's more than one disabled unit. Where would anyone else who's a wheelchair user end up parking? Has that been assessed?
So the provision of one wheelchair bay is in accordance with the London Plan wheelchair parking policy, and then as I mentioned earlier, so it's not anticipated that all wheelchair users will require a car to use the site. So in the event they do have a car, they will be able to apply for the controlled parking zone permit, but there'll be no additional parking on site for the 4 units.
Thank you. Just to clarify though, is there any wider parking issues that would be foreseen from that resulting from the construction of the block?
Not in any sort of material terms, because the majority of the units will be car free. It's only the potential that it's anticipated that the majority of units, disabled units, will be car free anyway, but it's in the event they will still be able to apply for a controlled parking zone permit, but that would only lead to sort of 4 parking spaces on the street being used, so sort of no material impact anticipated.
Thank you.
Councillor Whittam?
I think I missed the use class for the commercial bit.
So it's use class E, which is commercial, business and service. Chair, I have not run through the addendum. Would it be helpful to do that? And then if we need to look at the detailed conditions, we can.
Yeah, I think that would be useful. And then we'll come back.
Okay, so if we have a look at the addendum, if you look at paragraph 3, paragraph 3 of the addendum, and it's the bold heading, paragraph 202, there's been some minor amendments to the planning conditions. So their bullet pointed list of the planning conditions is there. And the reason was to remove the flat roof use condition, as this is it's basically restricting the use of the flat roof, so it's not used as sitting out space, but that's in fact covered by the green roof condition itself, so it doesn't need to be duplicated. And the disabled parking bay condition is instead being addressed in the legal agreement by obligation, so it hasn't gone, it's just being addressed in the legal agreement instead. Moving over to paragraph 202A, so the full conditions wording, so you'll note that the previous paragraph 202 correction lists all the planning conditions. Paragraph 202A, which is the full condition wording, is this A3 document in front of you as part of the addendum. So that's got the full wording of all the conditions in that list. Moving on to paragraph 203, so that's the planning obligations. They've been also amended. There's no major changes there. The car-free obligation was added in, and the disabled unit / parking has been added in place of the condition that was swapped out in the conditions above.
Thank you, Sean. Councillor Newlands?
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask about the obscure glazed windows? Do they open?
So the condition that I've put on, if you give me one moment, I'll just refer to that and then I'll explain the way it's been worded.
Mm-hmm.
It's 15 from 15, yes. Yeah.
It's page 5, yes.
Page 5.
So, Councillor Newlands, the way the condition has been worded is on the plans as currently shown. It doesn't look like the windows can open, but there has been provision made that the obscure glazing only needs to go up to 1.7 metres in height. So when the applicant or appellant, in the event that the appeal is allowed, come to submit those details, they can split the window pane, so that the lower pane would be obscure glaze, that's sort of up to eye level, and the top pane will be openable to allow for ventilation. So the privacy impact is mitigated by the eye level obscure glazing, and then above that the applicant could submit updated details of the glazing to allow for opening of the top pane.
Can I come back on that? Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
But you say so they have to be obscure glazed up to 1.7 metres.
That's correct, yes.
So I'm guessing that most people, I mean, that's kind of like head height for.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
sort of the
that's-
standard that's used.
So, I mean, the reason I'm asking is because obviously, again, I having looked at the report, I wasn't really able to visualise the percentage. So in some of the flats, it seems to me, would I be correct in understanding that more than half the windows are obscure glazed?
In terms of the window itself or the number of windows?
The number of windows.
Not the number of windows. And then in terms of the sort of the percentage of, because the floor to ceiling heights are quite tall, I've scaled the plans. So essentially halfway up the window is about 1.7, 1.8, and then above that, because the floor to ceilings are high, so that the window would sit higher. So that, as I said, you can open the top pane.
Right, but you'd have, I mean, obviously you wouldn't be able to see anything out the windows at all.
No,
You would only, but what you're saying is that, because I suppose I was concerned from the perspective if there was obscure glaze, so obviously there's a very high percentage of units which are single aspect anyway, but if you've got, I mean, because my understanding was obscure glaze, the whole point of it is that you can't open it, but I appreciate what you're saying now that you could open it at a split. Are you saying then, so all the windows would be big enough to do that, would they?
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Okay,
And
because I'm just conscious that if it's, therefore, even if it's dual aspect, but all the windows on one of those sides are obscure glazed, then, okay, you're saying they can open. Okay, fine. So we're saying that all the obscure glazed windows can open.
well, it'll be subject to when we do the assessment of this condition. So when the details come in, we'd sort of assess each window one by one. But yeah, predominantly the ones I've assessed, all the ones I've seen would be able to open on the top pane. It's just the main thing is ensuring that the privacy impacts and the overlooking is mitigated.
But could you foresee a situation whereby you've got a dual aspect? So we're saying with 20%, 28% a single aspect, which is very, very high proportion anyway. But then you've got so much a dual aspect, where potentially you won't be able to open the windows on the other aspect anyway. So they're effectively still single aspect.
In terms of the planning policy definitions of dual aspect, it doesn't get into whether it's obscure glazed or not.
But it surely gets into whether or not there is a throughput of air from two aspects rather than just one. And I'm just thinking, if you're not sure that every single obscure glazed window can open, then could you have a situation whereby all the windows on your second aspect can't be opened, and therefore effectively you've only got one aspect?
Yeah, that is theoretically possible, but it's also worth noting that the building will be mechanically ventilated as well. So that's the mitigation, and the applicant has provided a detailed assessment on overheating within their energy and sustainability statement.
Right. Okay. So that could happen. Can I have another question as well, please, Chair?
I think Councillor Moyes had his hand up for a moment to just check if he still has a question.
I do, yeah. Thank you, Chair. It was about the wheelchair flats, or the disabled flats with disabled access, because some of the most fraught conversations I've had since being elected are about people who are not on the ground floor, and the lifts break all the time, and they're essentially trapped at home. And I'm slightly curious, of the 5 flats for disabled people in this flat, and none of them on the ground floor, is there anything in the policy about having flats on the ground floor for wheelchair users or others?
The policy makes provision for when they're on the upper floors for there to be 2 lifts, and this, as you'll note, this development only provides 1 lift to the disabled units. So it's sort of worded that way, that once you go beyond the ground floor, the disabled unit should have access to 2 lifts.
I'll just go back to Councillor Newman's questions, then I'll come to you, Councillor.
Thank you. Could I just ask for clarification also very quickly? So it refers to, sorry, it refers to it being in flood zone 1, which is lowest flood risk, but then also it refers to it being the East Southwark critical drainage area. Could you explain what that means, please?
So that's an area at risk of surface water flooding, so it's slightly different. So the flood zone 1 to 3 is risk of flooding from rivers and the sea, so it's not a risk of that. What it is at risk of is surface water flooding, so that's, when water builds up on the roads and whatnot and hard standing. What the development has proposed is a sustainable urban drainage system, so that means that when water flows off the site, it will flow off the site at a greenfield rate, i.e. the site is, a grass square basically, that it will flow as it would naturally. So that's the mitigation. So it's not considered that the development would increase flood risk on or off the site, but by this mitigation.
Thank you.
Councillor Whittam?
Yeah, I'm worried about the wheelchair units as well, because I think it says all of them are undersized. And if they're all undersized and they haven't got access to a second lift, they can't really be called wheelchair units. What is the definition?
So the definition would be was technically set out in the building regulations, I suppose. So that's where those M43 and M42 numbers come from. So I cannot comment on what the building regulation provisions are because my expertise is planning. So I'm not sure whether the provision for a second lift is solely put out in planning policy or if it's carried as well into building regulations. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you.
Dennis, would you like to come in?
I think, Chair, the committee can seek clarification from the agent when they come up to speak on why these wheelchair units have been located on the upper floors. Yeah.
I'll just ask a question and come to you guys. But on that wheelchair guidance, it'd be good to know, because as it's raised, or you noted that it was below the guidance. How does that factor into the council's sort of approval or sort of acceptance of those as wheelchair units, if it's seen that they're below the guidance that we seek? On the Equalities and Human Rights Act. Thanks.
So going to each wheelchair unit one by one, so this is paragraph 70 of the officer report. So the requirement, so there's 70 of the officer report. So unit AO3, which is a 1-bed, 2-person unit, the requirement is 65 square metres, and the GIA achieved is 62.3, so that's a shortfall of approximately 2.7 square metres. The 2-bed, 4-person unit, that's unit AO5, the GIA is 79.4, so that's a shortfall of 5.6 square metres. AO7, which is a 1-bed, 2-person unit, the requirement is 65 square metres, it achieves 62.3 square metres, so that's a shortfall of approximately 2.7 square metres. AO9, which is a 2-bed, 4-person unit, the requirement is 85 square metres, and the unit achieves 79.4 square metres, so the shortfall is 5.6. A11, which is a 1-bed, 2-person unit, the requirement is 65 square metres, and the unit achieves 62.4, which is a shortfall of 2.6 approximately. So the shortfalls are not sort of large shortfalls. In the sort of larger units, they're approximately 5.5 square metres. In the smaller units, they're approximately 2.5 square metres.
Thanks. Which goes to Andy, and then Councillor Hickson.
You can go wherever you like. So I just want to talk about the affordable housing policy aspect of it. Just to confirm, that's met
solely through the possibility of the £1 million payment. There's no other factors involved that meet that policy. If you give me a moment, I'll go back to the slides. So yes, this is a summary of the policy P1 of the Southwark Plan, which requires 10 major developments, i.e. 10 homes or more, to provide the maximum amount of affordable...
Page is that, sorry, may I say?
Oh, sorry, that's slide 34.
34, thank you.
So yes, the policy requires developments to provide the maximum amount of affordable housing with a minimum target of 35%. However, that is caveated with subject to viability testing, which the applicant has provided and the council has had it independently assessed, and that's what concludes the viable contribution is a nil contribution, so that is the scheme is in deficit.
Councillor Hannigan.
Yes, thank you. Just to clarify, on the registered providers, is Southwark Council included, or is that just housing associations and otherwise?
I would need to check the list of the RPs that the applicant had engaged. I can do that, but you need to give me a few minutes.
I think we mentioned it in the briefing, but yeah, just to clarify. Cheers.
Councillor Newens.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask, you've referred to it being in blue pencil. Could you just sort of explain it when it goes to the planning inspectorate? Could you please explain exactly what that means? So this refers to the 8% in lieu contribution to affordable housing.
Well, sorry, you can answer. So blue pencil clause is ultimately it's up to the inspector to decide whether that clause is justified under the SIL regulations, whether it's necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms. So the applicant is saying that the £1 million payment in lieu is not necessary, but they've included, and it's called a blue pencil clause because in the old days you'd literally have it in blue pencil. And then the inspector, when deciding the appeal, decides whether to include that or not. So the officer report is saying that that £1 million payment in lieu should be included. If you endorse the officer recommendation, then at the appeal, the council would be saying permission should be granted, but there should be a £1 million payment in lieu. The applicant would be saying permission should be granted without that payment, and then ultimately it would be for the inspector to decide. £1 million payment in lieu is equal roughly to 8%. Compared to the 35%.
Councillor Whittam, if you still have a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering why the SIL at 1.3 million is paid before any sort of affordable housing contribution could be made.
SIL just operates under the SIL regulations, so it's calculated automatically, and then you become liable to pay SIL when development is commenced.
But is there a hierarchy of payments?
Well, not as such, it's just that SIL applies automatically. There's no sort of discretion to waive SIL, it's just a tax that applies.
But our affordable housing is in our Southwark Plan and is therefore policy.
So when the viability assessment is being undertaken to see what the affordable housing contribution can be, one of the costs that's factored in is SIL, because SIL is a cost that has to be paid.
Councillor Newens.
Thank you. Can you just quickly as well? So we talk about investigations around the registered provider, and I think from previous information we understand that it was not attractive to any registered provider that was acceptable to us because there weren't enough units on offer to that registered provider to manage. But therefore, is it not the case that if there were more units, if it were policy compliant on for because we're actually talking about sort of them having looked, what are we talking about? Are we saying that when they looked at the possibility of managing 8%, what were they on the basis of what percentage of and this is we're talking social housing rather than any other affordable housing, aren't we? On what basis and on what basis of what percentage of social housing did the registered providers turn it down because it wasn't enough for them to make it worth their while?
That offer was made to them at 35%, with the 10-year split being the ideal Southwark policy requirement. So it was offered to them with 35% of the units as affordable, but they still considered it to have too few units to take on board. It might be best to ask the applicant's agent as well, but that's my understanding. It's in the affordable housing statement submitted by the applicant.
Yeah, and that would be equivalent to, is it 13, 14 units?
Yeah,
approximately.
Approximately, yes.
Yeah.
Councillor Hannigan, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah. Cheers. Would you mind just going back to that list of registered providers, if that's no, cheers.
You'll have to give me a couple of moments. I'll need to pull it off the file.
Michael was saying, so in the viability assessment, CU is actually listed as a development cost. Yeah, so it has to be paid first before any offer is given towards affordable housing.
Apologies, Councillor. I was just getting the file up. So, Councillor Newlands, that was, I stand corrected, it was 34.8%, but that's, I presume, is a rounding error, or a round, the sort of round as close as you can get to 35%. So that's what was offered. Moving on to the registered provider interest, and whether Southwark Council were, so this is Southwark's preferred list, so the applicant did engage with the preferred list, and also engage with some non-profit / traditional and some for-profit. So, as I mentioned, there was only one RP who showed interest, and that was Rem Plus, a non-profit. They were interested, but they are not on the preferred list, and they proposed a tenure type which does not accord with the Southwark Plan policy, which is the affordable rent-to-buy tenure. And then these other sort of, I did summarise in the briefing pack, but this is the other RPs that the applicant has engaged with. So I'll just remind you, so the column on the left is whether they were interested, so well, the remainder won't be, and the column on the right is if they were on the preferred list. So I'll just, I won't read them all out, but I'll leave it on this screen for a little while so you can have a look at the reasons why they were not interested. So yeah, it was a low number of units. RPs weren't interested in Section 106 opportunities. Again, low numbers. Some RPs weren't looking for any new properties. Some didn't prefer the ownership type. And then lastly, I think that was the last one, that it's outside the opportunity areas for that RP, or sort of outside the area of operation for that RP. And I believe the last ones, there was no response.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to, so if the council didn't Southwark Council want any as council homes at all?
I would need to check with the applicant's agent whether Southwark Council were engaged. From looking at that list, I don't believe they were.
Yeah, that could be a question we could ask the applicant's agent. I have a question, or I guess clarification about the going back to the affordable housing. So with the figures in the report, it talked about the approximately 93% of households having incomes that indicate a need for social or intermediate housing across Southwark. And so that sort of gives the implication that only sort of 7% based on this would maybe be in a position to be able to afford these properties.
So these figures are... These figures, Chair, are taken from the Southwark Plan sort of info box for the policy itself, policy P1. I believe the 93% need is done on paycheck data, so it's the proportion of the paycheck that goes towards, rent, essentially. So yeah, it is a high number of households and have incomes that would need social housing, but are likely not to be eligible because it's such a high proportion.
So with the tilted balance policy, you mentioned that the fact it was using brownfield site was quite a lot higher weight in the balance. But as the council clearly has a high need for affordable housing, how did that sort of outweigh the sort of need for affordable housing, I suppose? I don't know if that's a too complication.
Well, I think as Sean has explained, the officer's view is that there's no conflict with the affordable housing policies because the 35% requirement is subject to viability. And the council has independently reviewed the applicant's viability assessment and, well, although there was quite a big disagreement because the applicant said they were £6 million in deficit and the independent review said it was more like £1.5 million. Ultimately, it's still a conclusion that it wouldn't be viable to provide any affordable housing. So the lack of affordable housing, the fact that the applicant isn't providing any affordable housing means that obviously affordable housing isn't a benefit to be weighed in the balance, apart from the £1 million payments in lieu that the council says should be secured. But officer's view is that there's no conflict with the policies because it's been viability tested.
Councillor Whittam?
Just ask if what the profit margin was for both viability calculations.
I don't know off the top of my head. You could ask the applicant's agent. It's correct that viability assessments assume that there'll be profit for the developer. So when we say it's not viable, because the idea being is that if there's no profit, no one's going to build anything. So that's the justification. I don't know what the percentage is off the top of my head, but it's a certain percentage of profit that when we say it's not viable, it's whether it hits that profit percentage.
So at least 15%.
Yeah, I'll find out for you. Just give me one moment. I believe it was on the lower end, so the standard inputs are between 15 and 20%, and I believe it was 15%. We'll double check with the agent, but that is at the lower end, and that's the sort of standard inputs. The standard inputs don't tend to drop lower than that.
Councillor Hannigan first.
Cheers. I just wanted to briefly request, just while Sean is doing that, at a sensible interval, that we have a comfort break for perhaps 5 minutes, if that would be of any use.
Yeah, we can have a comfort break before we come to the applicant. That works. Councillor Hickson?
So, and just in terms of the failure to meet the kind of a profit margin, is there anything unique about this site that means that it's not able to do that? I mean, because if we have a 35% target, presumably most of the time we can reach that kind of figure. But here we're minus. I mean, it is minus 1.85 million, and I just wonder if there's anything unique about this site. Maybe this is a question for the agent. But what is unique about this site that means it is so far from
I don't know, Sean, do you know from the viability assessment?
It's quite detailed, the viability assessment, and it's all site specific, so I can't sort of make a generalisation across the market, nor can I, it's a very, very detailed document, so I must admit I'm no valuation expert, I'm not a registered surveyor, so we have to trust the advice given to. This is why the council appoints an independent surveyor to review these documents on our behalf, because it really is a very specialised thing.
Lakeson, I think the agent can summarise, but it's mainly the development costs. I think it's just gone up, but they can when they come forward, they can go through that.
Thank you.
Just to explain on the affordable housing, the officer recommendation is also to include what's called a late stage viability review mechanism, which means that at the moment the assessment is that it wouldn't be viable to provide any affordable housing. The review mechanism means that once a certain number of units have been sold, you look at it again to see if the viability assessment was wrong and to see if they did actually make more profit than we thought they would, and if they did, then they'd be required to provide a payment in lieu. So the late stage review mechanism is there to try and make sure that if the viability assessments were unduly pessimistic, then there's that fallback later down the line.
Councillor Moyes, do you have a question? No. Councillor Newlands.
Thank you. Can I ask, does the applicant who is proposing to develop this site own that land? I mean, I'm trying to, so where I'm going with this is because, is it possible that the applicant has simply massively paid the cost of the land, and therefore we're looking at a viability assessment which involves an inflated cost of the plot of land, and we're supposed to sort of bear the downside of that, in that it doesn't meet our policy in terms of delivery of affordable housing.
Yeah, our understanding is that the applicant does own the site. Yeah, they own the site.
Could I come back on that issue, please? Yeah. Thank you. So, I mean, just so the applicant, and that would have been my expectation. So yes, but I suppose therefore, because I'm not really familiar with the details of how the viability process works, but I am very conscious that there have been previous applications in the past where it's been abundantly clear that land has been sold not based on its current value, but on some future proposed use value, speculative value, which has already therefore inflated its value to sort of such a to keep track of what it's supposed to realise when it's sold as housing. So you're already onto a loser there, because you've because the speculative end use value already supposes that you're building all this incredibly profitable housing on it, and doesn't take into account the affordable element that the developer will be required to provide. So is it not simply the case that the land value in the viability assessment is just over? I mean, I appreciate that must be quite painful for the developer if they have overpaid, but nevertheless, I mean, how confident are we that it is actually correct? Because it seems that if we're constantly basing viability on somebody else's, like, you know, that kind of land value, then it seems that this might be sort of a recurring theme.
I would sort of need to speak to the viability consultant themselves. My sort of layman's planning understanding is the land value is basically how you work out is the land value is the final input. So you work out all your costs; they all go first. So you work out how much the development's going to achieve as the gross development value, and then you subtract all your costs. So that's things like SIL, build cost, developer profit, disposal costs, and then at the end of that, it essentially puts out the land value. So the land value itself doesn't feed into this, what's left over, and whether that's a fair price for the land. But as I said, this is my layman's understanding of the process. So I would need to speak to.
Sorry, can I just come back very quickly though? Because therefore, I mean, you've already said then that it's you're basically looking at your final realised value and then working back to work out what the land value is. But it sounds, if we're in a position where we're saying that the developer is saying that they cannot afford any affordable housing, then it looks very much to me as if the final value that upon which they have then extrapolated back and come to the land value was simply incorrect.
I think, so none of us here are viability experts. It is a highly detailed technical area. It's something the applicant's agent might be able to speak to in terms of the existing use value. I think it's important to say that this is why, as Sean explained, the council appoints independent expert viability consultants who obviously didn't agree with the applicant on everything because there was a substantial difference between what the applicant said and what the independent review concluded. So they did scrutinise the inputs, the decisions, and while they disagreed on the ultimate values, 6 million deficit versus 1.85 million deficit, the overall headline conclusion that it wouldn't be viable remained the same. So it's not officers just relying on what the applicant has said, I suppose.
I have just a further question on the payment in lieu. So just to clarify, that was £1 million. Was that agreed with the applicant and then the applicant withdrew that?
So I've only taken on this scheme over the last couple of weeks. That's my understanding, is the initial offer was, in spite of the viability testing, there is an offer of £1 million, but that is subsequently now contested and will be a matter for the inspector to determine whether it's necessary.
Yes, Chair. It had been agreed in principle in preparation of taking this case to a previous committee. But then there were delays due to the local elections and the PETA period. Then during that period, the applicant then lodged this non-determination appeal.
Thanks, Dennis. Does anyone have any further points of clarification for Sean? No? Great. Thank you, Sean. I'd like to propose then a quick 5-minute comfort break. Okay with that? Okay, great. Great. Thanks, Gerald. There. So everyone ready to carry on? Yeah. Great. So next up would be coming up to it's on to representations. And so just to check, does anyone present wish to speak in objection to the application? Okay, so no, we don't have anyone present here to speak in objection. So next I'll move to the applicant and their agent. So we have so we have one registered speaker, which is Aaron Henneke. If you'd like to come forward and introduce yourself, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. My name is Aaron Henneke, Associate Director at Hybrid Planning, and I'm the agent for the application. The proposal before you tonight build upon the principles approved by Southwark Council in 2018 for a similar mixed-use development put forward by the applicants, using greater design efficiency to provide more homes with the same height and massing parameters. The proposals are the culmination of a multi-year process of engagement with planning and design officers for the future of this long vacant brownfield site. 3 separate pre-application meetings were held with officers in 2024, where detailed proposals were discussed and agreed prior to submission. We also hosted an on-site public consultation event in July 2024, where attendees expressed support for development of the site. And in response to residents of Cooperative House in particular, changes were made to the designs to address concerns over height and daylight sunlight impacts. Further minor amendments and additional information were provided to officers during the application itself, ensuring no objections from internal or statutory consultees remain. As confirmed by officers in their recommendation to approve, the development is entirely acceptable on balance. The benefits of the development are many, from the delivery of 38 new homes on a brownfield site to the substantial improvements to townscape, biodiversity, open space, and drainage. The provision of these 38 new homes is particularly important in light of the Council's lack of a 5-year housing rent supply. With funding now secured, construction works are anticipated to start within a year, ensuring the timely delivery of these much-needed homes. Tonight you are being tasked with deciding whether planning permission should be granted, with your decision directly informing the Council's position during the forthcoming appeal. Despite how it may seem, your decision here tonight matters. Your decision has the potential to help finally bring the site forward, having long been earmarked for development, but having stalled due to the economic difficulties born out of the pandemic. In this case, build costs are now over 50% higher than in 2018, whereas residential sales values have only increased by less than 1%. Despite the greater number of homes, the proposed development still shows a financial deficit, and the Council's independent viability review confirms as much. Taking it further, 27 housing associations were contacted about these proposals, with no viable interest expressed in acquiring on-site affordable housing in this case. Notwithstanding, the Section 106 agreement includes a late-stage review mechanism to capture any uplift in values as affordable housing. It also includes over £100,000 in financial contributions, including towards cycle lane improvements on Rye Lane and public open space, plus over £1.3 million towards community infrastructure levy. By voting in favor, members will be ensuring the long-term and viable use of this long vacant site for much-needed housing and infrastructure. We therefore respectfully request that members resolve to agree their officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Do any members have any questions for the applicant, for Aaron? Sean?
Cheers, thank you very much. I just want to ask something that obviously stemmed out of what I mentioned to the officers earlier. Did you engage Southwark Council about using any of the flats as council housing?
So as far as I'm aware, we did not directly engage with the council. We did begin engaging with the planning officers in, I think it was July of 2024. So it's been kind of within their, on their books, if you will, for a number of years now. I believe the housing team likely would have been consulted as part of the application as well. Yeah, but as far as I know, no expression of interest has been made.
Councillor Newlands?
Thank you. Let's come back to the point I just raised also with the officer. In a sense, I think you probably already answered the question, but just to make sure. So my inference from what you just said is that you actually acquired the site quite a long time ago, and that obviously the conditions have changed since you acquired the site. So is it fair to say that you paid more for coming back to the whole point of the viability assessment, obviously you've paid for a piece of land which you anticipated to be able to achieve realised end value of X, and actually because of the way in which situation has changed, your realised value is less than that, or anything in, the costs have changed for whatever reason, and because if you're taking your end value and then extrapolating back, taking into account all those costs, and that's how you get to your land value, obviously I'm assuming then the basis that you acquired the land was for a quite different set of circumstances from the one that you're facing now, and that is where we've lost our affordable housing.
So I'm not a viability expert, so I'll kind of start with that. My clients, as I understand it, purchased the site, I think in 2015 or earlier. So they began working with the council. I think at that time there was multiple pre-application meetings with the council, which ultimately led to the permission that was granted in 2018. Since then, obviously the pandemic hit. At that time that included some affordable housing, but that's no longer viable. The assessment by JJV and by our own viability consultant was on the basis of the existing land having no value. So nil value. And so essentially what it does, the viability assessments tallied up the costs and compared them solely with the value of kind of the realized, the final development. And on that basis, there would be a deficit of, as JJV have announced, or the council's position being about 1.8 million. So I don't believe the price paid for the land kind of factors into the current viability position, because that was factored out entirely out of it.
And with the viability coming in your assessment of it was £6 million a deficit. Could you just explain how what the reason is for continuing with the development if it's showing that it's going to be a deficit of £6 million?
Yeah, so at that time, there was a commercial decision made, effectively. I think the difference, and again, I'm not kind of the viability expert here, was a difference of opinion with respect to construction costs and the value of the scheme. So JJV had a more, more optimistic view of the construction cost, the build cost, and the values that could be achieved. Which ultimately, in rebuttal, our kind of clients accepted many of those assumptions as well. So I think at this point, the clients the applicants have decided to make a commercial decision to deliver it, which effectively means they will take less profit to develop the site.
Councillor Newlands?
Thank you. I'd like to come back on that point. Is it even conceivable that the land value is not included in the viability assessment? Is that actually possible?
You have the list of variables and inputs, isn't it, used for the viability calculation? So it is.
Yeah, if you give me a moment, I'll pull up the guidance on viability and sort of nationwide planning practice guidance.
May I just come in? So again, I have the viability review up. So again, the benchmark land value was initially looked at the previous planning consent as the kind of value of the site, and because in current day times that kind of resulted in a deficit. Therefore, rather than incorporating a further deficit into the viability review, which then would have increased the deficit overall for the viability result, it was instead taken to be zero land value.
Councillor Whittam?
Yeah, coming back to the 35%, that would have equated to roughly 13 units. Where would they have been positioned?
I believe it was 14 units by habitable room basis. I don't know off the top of my head exactly where those affordable units were positioned when we presented that to the RPs, but my guess is it probably would have been pepper potted throughout the scheme. We might also likely presented them as a single block as well. because some RPs do prefer to have them kind of collectively as easier to manage. And as part of that marketing exercise as well, not only is it when Altair, who are the consultant who carried that out, not only do they present the kind of 14 units, if you will, they present the full plans, and they also invite any sort of offers that might exceed that amount as well.
Councillor Wood?
And the other question comes for the wheelchair units that are not on ground floor and they've only got one lift. So should anything go wrong with that lift, then they are effectively trapped in their flats. How is that possible to justify?
Yeah, so we worked with design officers at the council, Richard Craig, across the 3 pre-app meetings, and also that kind of involved quite substantial site layout planning and kind of internal layout planning as well. The wheelchair units have been designed to meet building regs Part M43 compliance, so kind of their size and space, orientation, etc. standards. So that's the compliance there, which complies with the London Plan standards as well. As far as I'm aware, there is no requirement other than perhaps within Southwark's design guidance that requires a secondary lift for wheelchair units. We have chosen, in terms of siting the wheelchair units, the flats which are overly large compared to the kind of minimum space standards as well. So that was partially what drove the location of those wheelchair units within the scheme.
There must be some sort of evacuation plan, though.
There's not been one presented, but we would be happy to provide one or secure one as part of either a condition or a Section 106 agreement. Absolutely.
Councillor Hannigan?
Cheers. Just wanted to know, we mentioned about 93% of people in need of affordable housing in Southwark. Who would the market, therefore, be for these houses? Is it assumed that the final 7% would be the market, or are there any attempts to market them abroad or otherwise?
They would be open market units, so for anybody who has the ability to rent or purchase the units could do so. There, as far as I'm aware, there's no intention to market them abroad. I can't comment on kind of the wider market and that sense, but.
I have a question just on the £1 million payment in lieu that was agreed. And would you be able to just explain how, I guess, in consideration of the deficit situation, how that payment was considered, I suppose, from your side, or found to be reasonable?
Yeah, so again, that was a commercial offer made by the applicants at the time, who do understand the importance and value of affordable housing. That offer was made, I think, probably about a year ago now, as part of the discussions with officers who, despite having the viability evidence to say that the scheme was in deficit and could not support could not support an affordable housing offer, suggested that perhaps one be provided. Since that year, the viability has worsened, as I'm told by my clients, partially due to kind of the ongoing wars and other kind of economic factors. That's not reflected in the viability review process, which was done probably about a year ago now. And further to that, there was the kind of consideration as part of the appeal as to whether or not that offer met the tests of the SIL regulations 122 in particular, as to the necessity of it, given the fact that there's no policy conflict, because the viability evidence confirms that it cannot viably support it. Hence, that's why it was ultimately withdrawn as part of the appeal. But it is within there for the inspector or for yourselves to consider.
Because I suppose with the offer of it sort of gives the impression that it is a viable option, at least in relation to the viability test that was done and the viability test that we have to look at. So I guess that's a good thing to understand.
essentially what that offer would do would kind of further reduce the profit margin effectively. So that's why it's a commercial offer in that sense. And the profit margin, again, I think they mentioned the industry standard is kind of been between 15 to 20%. And I believe the JJV review adopted, I think, a 15 or 16% profit margin. So it was already on that low end of what would be reasonably acceptable or expected for a developer. But yeah, again, that was a commercial decision at that time.
Are there any further questions for the applicant? Councillor Ferguson.
Hi there. Yeah, I wondered if the independent review, which changed the figure from kind of 6.17 to 1.85, was there any thought as a result of that about the viability of the £1 million contribution?
Sorry, any thought about what, sorry?
So because of the fact that the independent kind of review on the affordability of the scheme essentially changed by around 5 million or 4.5 million, was there any thought that possibly that the £1 million contribution could be made because of that difference?
I suppose that perhaps could have factored into the applicant's decision at that time to make the £1 million offer. Yes, but I suppose again in planning terms, JJV, the council's viability consultant, determined that on a fully 100% market basis, that without any affordable housing, the scheme is unviable in planning terms. And that's kind of been fully assessed both by an independent viability consultant, but also a separate cost or kind of QS consultant.
Councillor Moyes.
Thank you, Chair. We touched upon wheelchair users earlier. I just wondered if there was a reason why some or all of them weren't on the ground floor then.
I think that kind of goes back to the size of the units that could be achieved on the ground floor, not being of the standard that would enable Part M43 compliance or wheelchair user standards per the building regulations, I believe was the answer. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to follow up to that, it's clearly been a long project, this, hasn't it? Because they've had your clients have the land since 2015, and there's lots of ups and downs. Lots happened since then. And there's all this talk of viability, which we'll be getting our heads around. But it strikes me that somebody living in the area in Peckham, the 93% of those needing social or intermediate housing, it's not viable for them to consider living in this development, is it really? And what your client thinks about that reality?
Yeah, no, I fully appreciate that. I mean, I think it's difficult for me to comment on kind of personal circumstances, and I don't know, for instance, the exact sales price or rental values off the top of my head, and who might be able to afford what in that case. I think again, we fully acknowledge that there is an issue with affordability in Southwark and within London and the UK generally. There are different kind of thoughts about how that could be handled, and I'd say that the provision of any homes have a potential impact with affordability. And again, I think with the housing land supply issues, there is a need to provide more homes of any kind, and so we think that the benefits of providing these 38 market homes are substantial.
Are there any further questions for the applicant? No. Great. Thank you. Thank you for your time, Aaron. Next, we'll move to any supporters. So, does anyone present live within 100 metres of the development site and wish to speak in support of the application? That's a no. And then ward councillors. So, are there any ward councillors present who wish to speak? I don't believe we have any who have registered, and none I can see present here. Okay, great. So, following that, would any member of the committee like to speak further on this matter? Then we'll go into debate. There is also an option for further clarifications from officers as well, but Councillor Newlands. So, in terms of speaking further, I think we could go through a lot
more clarifications. But fundamentally, my own view is that in many respects, it does not meet the expectations which we as councillors all would have that housing development ought to meet. And it's not just the affordable housing, it's the size of the wheelchair units, it's the single aspect, it's the obscure glaze, and the fact that people can't be able to see out their windows unless they're taller than 1.7 metres, and so on and so forth. That's my, I could go on, as I'm sure you would expect I could. But in summary, that's what I would say in relation to this development.
Councillor Hannigan.
I would like to concur with what Councillor Newens has stated.
Councillor Whitton.
And make that 3.
In light of that, I think it would be worthwhile getting some legal sort of advice from Michael. So I now move.
Going to close session.
So that's what I'm going to do. Yeah. So I'll read this bit. I now move that the public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the following discussion involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 1 to 7 of the Access to Information Procedure rules of the Constitution, namely privileged legal advice. Is that seconded? Jane? Agreed. Is that agreed?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, agreed. So if the members of the public would please leave the room.
We need to stop the feed.
And we'll stop the feed. Yeah. Thank you for your patience there. Just to check, would any members like to debate any further? Happy to. Okay. In which case, I would like to propose a motion that if the committee had determined the application, it would have been refused. If the committee had determined the application, it would have refused it for the following reasons, and that at the forthcoming appeal, the council's position is that the planning permission should be refused for the following reasons, which are, firstly, the quality of the accommodation. The proposed development would fail to provide a satisfactory standard of residential accommodation for future occupiers and, when viewed as a whole, would result in poor quality living conditions across a significant proportion of the scheme, with particular and significant harm arising in relation to the proposed wheelchair accessible dwellings. The development relies on a number of single aspect dwellings, including wheelchair accessible units A03, A07 and A11, located on the Rye Lane frontage, which is exposed to high levels of environmental noise. These units, together with other dwellings facing Rye Lane, would be likely to require occupants to keep windows closed for prolonged periods, resulting in an over-reliance on mechanical ventilation to maintain acceptable internal environmental conditions. A number of units are further compromised by the extensive use of obscure glazed windows, restricted outlooks towards blank brick elevations, internal winter gardens in place of external private amenity space, and limited opportunities for meaningful views out. The proposal also demonstrates shortcomings in daylight provision, with numerous habitable rooms, including living spaces and bedrooms within wheelchair accessible units, failing to meet BRE target illuminance criteria guidelines. In addition, the proposed wheelchair accessible dwellings fail to achieve the minimum internal floor space required set out by Southwark Plan Policy P8, with units A03, A05, A07, A09 and A11 falling below the prescribed minimum standards. The scheme also fails to provide a second lift serving wheelchair accessible homes located above ground floor level, contrary to Policy P8 requirements. The deficiencies in floor space, outlook, daylight, privacy, noise exposure, amenity provision, and accessibility collectively result in an unacceptable standard of accommodation, particularly for future wheelchair users, and fail to demonstrate that the proposed single aspect dwellings would achieve adequate passive ventilation, daylight, privacy, and overheating resilience. There are concerns the development has the potential to result in a significant adverse effect for those with the protected characteristics of disability. For these reasons, the proposal is contrary to Policy P8, P15 and P56 of the Southwark Plan 2022, Policy D6 of the London Plan 2021, the Housing Design Standards Supplementary Planning Guidance 2023, the Support for House Building London Plan Guidance 2026, and the Southwark Householder Development SPD 2025, minimum room sizes only. As such, the development would provide a poor quality residential environment and fails to secure a high standard of amenity and accessible housing for future occupants. The further reason for refusal is in relation to affordable housing. The proposed development fails to deliver a 35% affordable housing contribution, social rented and intermediate homes, and would therefore not maximise the provision of affordable housing on-site, off-site, or by way of payment in lieu, whilst the applicant has submitted viability evidence which seeks to justify a reduced affordable housing contribution in accordance with Policy P1 of the Southwark Plan 2022, the proposal would nonetheless result in an unacceptable loss of opportunity to address Southwark's acute and pressing affordable housing need. The Council's evidence demonstrates a significant and persistent demand for social rented and intermediate housing, with over 18,000 households currently on the housing wait list and a particularly acute need for social rented homes. Although Southwark has a strong record of housing delivery and continues to facilitate substantial housing growth, the borough is currently unable to demonstrate a full 5-year housing land supply, with the Authority Monitoring Report 2025-26 identifying only 4.53 years of supply. In these circumstances, the delivery of affordable houses assumes even greater importance. Every residential development is expected to make the maximum reasonable contribution towards meeting identified affordable housing needs, and schemes which fail to do so represent a missed opportunity to address the borough's substantial housing pressures. Given the scale of the identified need, the limited availability of development opportunities within the borough, and the council's strategic objective of maximising affordable housing delivery, the shortfall in affordable housing within this proposal attracts substantial weight. Even acknowledging the submitted viability position, the development would fail to make an adequate contribution towards meeting Southwark's acute affordable housing needs, and would therefore conflict with the National Planning Policy Framework 2024 and Policy P1 of the Southwark Plan 2022. Substantial weight has been attributed to the value of using brownfield land for homes and other identified needs, including the opportunity to remediate any potential contamination, potentially contaminated land. But the weight does not outweigh the harms identified. Officers have not identified a strong reason for refusal when viewed against policies that protect areas or assets of particular importance, but officers have identified significant adverse impacts in relation to the standard of residential accommodation for future occupiers when viewed as a whole, and in particular the potential for significant harm arising in relation to the proposed wheelchair accessible dwellings, together with the failure to provide affordable housing that is considered to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefit of the development. When assessed against the policies of the NPPF taken as a whole, having had particular regard to key policies for directing development to sustainable locations, making effective use of land, securing well-designed places and providing affordable homes, individually or in combination, including the specific paragraphs within the footnote.
So, anyone second?
So, would anyone second that? Councillor Salmon. So that's been seconded.
All those.
So if we move to the vote, if I just read it the same as this. We will now move to the vote. I will call the voting members of this committee to vote by show of hands to indicate if you are in favour, against, or that you wish to abstain from the motion. So those in favour of the motion. Sorry, Councillor Newman.
Sorry, so the motion is to reject,
The motion
rather
is,
than the recommendation, which was to approve.
the motion is to refuse.
Yes.
Yeah, for the reasons that I just read out. Is everyone clear on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So all those in favour of the motion? Okay, great. So yeah, that's unanimous, as I see it. So the motion passes, and the application is, or the committee has identified that they would refuse the application.
Yep. So that's the end.
So yeah, that's the end of our business
Thank
for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Shall I give you the papers?